Okay, welcome everyone to this episode of Dive Beyond Sport. Now, I'm really excited for this episode because this guest is a very close friend of ours and also someone who is an incredible athlete, but also someone that I've got a lot of questions for, which we'll get into later. So without further ado, Jack Law, welcome.
Hello everyone. Hi. Good to be here.
Obviously, very quickly, just for the people who aren't aware of your story up until now, your elevator life story.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I am Jack Law, Team GB diver. Been diving for about 23 years now. I've been to 4 Olympic Games, 4 Commonwealth Games, and am an Olympic champion.
I mean, that is quite the set of results and performances, Jack. And that is why I'm so excited to speak to you, because obviously all three of us have done diving journeys together, right? We all started at a very similar time. We're all basically the same age. You guys went on a bit longer than me. But nevertheless, we all shared this time together. And what's incredible is you are one of the most successful divers of all time on probably across any country, really. You're one of the most successful divers ever, which is insane, and you're one of our closest friends. And what's amazing is personally for me, we've obviously, I was tracking your journey, and then it kind of seemed like particularly around 13 or 14 was probably when you really started to create this bit of space between us. And so I want to kind of start directly asking about that time. From your point of view, do you have that right? Like, was there a time that you felt like, okay, yeah, I'm really like going places now, and I'm ahead of the pack, so to speak?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, I mean, obviously, talking about yourself and your own success can be, somewhat uncomfortable for everybody. But obviously, because we all shared that, we are the same age. We were all in the same year and the same age group growing up. So we all shared that together. And of course, without feeling too big-headed, there was obviously a point when the gap broadened somewhat. But then obviously there's been, things have caught back up over time, which has been, Fiona's and our stories have been together. And I think that although we've drifted here, but we found our way back to being very, very close on scores. But yeah, of course, there was a point when things started going. And I think you're right. It was probably around the age of 13 or 14. I think that from a young age when I started and when I was with Damien in Harrogate, when I was 7, I started diving. I think he was really set on the basic principles of diving, and he, in comparison to my friends, kept me back a little bit more, not because of inability to do harder dives, but more of a willingness to try and achieve with the slightly easier ones. I remember being 11 years old, diving in Camo in Canada with Jack Haslam. We were on me and him, we went there a year below what we were supposed to be. I think we were Group D and we were diving in Group C. So Group D was 11 years old and Group C being 12 to 13. And I remember our coaches saying, look, don't worry if you come near the bottom. It's not a problem or whatever. Anyway, me and Jack finished first and second on platform. But he was doing back 2.5 pike, which is crazy at 11 years old to think that he was doing that. I remember you and James Milton and Sam Knapp and all these other names that we had when we were growing up. Josh Dowd, Yona, everyone doing quite complex dives. And I was held back a little bit until around 11, 12, 13. And that's when I think I was allowed to do those harder dives. And I think I broke a stride with that quite well. And because of the sheer amount of volume of the easier stuff and the increased strength of being, a young lad going through puberty at that time, I think it all kind of just fell into place nicely for me. And I think that's when that gap kind of started somewhat.
You say the gap started at like 13, 14, but for me, it was a different story, different perspective. That gap was already wide from the start, because I remember my first junior in Group D must have been 10 years old, and I came last in every single event. You were probably top 3 in every event, being by 100 points in at least 2 of those. and
Sick
in a
dives.
group D list, considering we're doing some of the most basic dives, like literally like a forward dive, an inward dive, a back dive, and maybe you had very slightly more difficulty, but it was so clear from that point how incredible you were as an athlete, and it was amazing to see, because it obviously lifted the standard of our entire group. And for me at that point, I just felt like I had to be as close as possible. And Freddie, you're included in that as well, because like you were definitely of that standard. I just wanted to be as close as possible to you both, to Jack Haslam, to Sabnap, to all the names that you've mentioned, which is quite a nice reflection, because I knew that would lift me up as a diver. Who was that person for you? Was there someone that you felt that you had to be alongside, or match, or beat to drag you along? Was it any of us, or was there any other people that drove you?
It's a great question. I think that when I look back, and especially at the time, I remember thinking that it was everybody. I think that I remember it feeling like quite a dog eat dog world for us. There was 8 of us lads, probably 8 or 9 of us who were really good, really good standard. Some who were on the using a slightly easier side of the diving, and then some people who were potentially using harder dives. If you look at, let's say, for example, bottom group C for us, so that's all of us. But then you've got James Milton in there, you've got Tom Daly in there, and you look at how stacked that could be. You've got 10 lads who all could hit a final, and back in the day, finals used to be 6 as well. You remember back in White Rose, or any of those little competitions that we used to do. I remember thinking it was really difficult just to make a final. So there was never really a person that I was thinking I had to beat them to be in with a shout. It was basically like, I've got to make a final. I've got to try and beat a couple of these people and then try and do it again. So I think that I was blessed in that way. I mean, so many things have fallen into place for my career, but I think having that amount of competition from such a young age kind of built that resilience that I took into the later part of my career.
I mean, that is so true, though. I totally agree with that, Jack. I think I definitely wouldn't have been the level of diver I was without you guys. But again, another thing that came back to me when I was thinking about the fact we were going to do this podcast with you, Jack, I remembered it was a junior nationals, junior elites in Sheffield. And I think this might have been, you might have clean sweeped everything at this point, but you definitely won 3 meter, because I remember after that event, my coach at the time came up to me and said, like, did you see the way Jack was presenting himself during this competition? He looked like he was going to win from the get-go. And I was like, well, I wasn't really looking at Jack, to be honest. I was just doing my dives.
What I'm doing.
Yeah. But clearly he was watching you like, oh, damn, okay. Like, there is a difference between the way you're presenting yourself and the way you're diving that goes beyond just doing a good dive. There was clearly something that he was really into. And I just remembered that. And as I was reflecting, I remembered that and I thought, that's super interesting. So it suggests that there, I mean, you said you were like you felt like it was dog eat dog a bit. So we were obviously super close friends, but clearly there was a really high level of competitiveness for you at that time.
Yeah, and I think that what the times I'm more referring to is probably around the age of about 10 or 11, when we were all kind of fighting it out constantly, and obviously when, especially after I broke my arm, I think that coming back from that was when I really noticed that the gap it started to broaden quite somewhat.
That was the turning point for me, was when you broke your arm, right?
Yeah.
Which was a huge incident. It was from then, when you came back, it was like a different person.
Yeah.
It was unbelievable, the change.
Yeah, and I broke my arm at the Nationals in Sheffield, and I won the platform the day before. So I was obviously, I was at a good standard. But that was back in the day when I was tipped to be the platformer, the platform diver, not the springboard diver. And I'd won the platform. And looking back, I have to admit that going into that 3 meter, which is the day that I broke my arm, I was hoping to win that as well. So already at that point, it was definitely I was hoping to be there or thereabouts, qualified for Junior Europeans. But I think after I broke my arm, I think it showed me how much I wanted to do it. When I was a kid and when I was competing in those competitions, I loved diving and I loved being there. But I was doing it because I loved it, not because I wanted to really, really achieve in it. I did want to win all the time. I've always been competitive in everything I do. I mean, you know that, yeah, Yonam. Probably the amount of games we've played and it gets, bitter and nasty.
Just a bit over the top sometimes.
Sometimes, yeah, you could say that. But I always had that drive. But I think that after I broke my arm, I thought that I was going to be able to, I was 14. I thought I was going to hang out with all my friends and I was going to go talk to girls and have a good time and enjoy myself. And I was like, I actually put it into perspective how much I missed it. I just wanted to be at diving. That's all I wanted to do. And I remember that I was back training in, I think it was 8 weeks after I broke my arm, was doing feet first stuff. The scar had healed up, so there was no risk of infection, and I was back in the pool doing feet first skills. And I went to Barcelona a couple of weeks later for that junior international. I competed there with a feet first list within 3 and a bit months of snapping my humerus in half with a big gnarly scar on the back of my arm. And I think that basically at that time when I took off and I had that real setback, just put it into perspective that this is actually something I really want to do. A bit of a blessing in disguise, I guess. But it also happened to be the time when I was going through puberty. And I think that looking back and put pictures of me when I was a kid, I always had the frame. I'm short. I've always had big calves and I've always been, slim and somewhat muscular. But I think that during that puberty time was when I really started to develop quite fast. And it felt like a rapid growth, which paired beautifully with springboard, of course.
I mean, there's a few moments in your career where, potential setbacks that have then, like in everyone's story, then become these, very important pivotal moments. But I just quickly want to go back, actually, just right to the beginning, just because you mentioned just about Damien, your coach, holding you back in terms of skills, and really nailing the basics. And that was the opposite to what I was doing. The philosophy behind my coaching when I was very young was do as much as you can, as fast as possible, and then you'll just do as much of it as you can and you'll just get better. But the issue is that that built into me some fundamental errors and habits that I then found really hard to break in the future. So I really connected with what you said then, because that's very true to me, that I can see why that would benefit. And there are other stories, like I remember, Melissa Wu, I think she was kept quite basic for a while, and then suddenly she did a full 10-meter list, in very little time, but it was all really excellently built up to. So, and I just wondered if there were any other philosophies like that you can sort of trace back to your earlier times as a diver too, that you think might have impacted your success.
Oh, that's a good question. I think that being held back, I don't think it was necessarily Damien putting the brakes on and say, no, we're gonna, I'm gonna hold him back. I'm gonna force him to do these things. I think Damien just had a passion for making things right, and he knew, I think, from the get go that I had success, or I had success potential, and I think he could see that and wanted to do it right. I came from a grassroots club. We had a 1 meter, 2, 3. We had no bubbles to be able to see where we were. We had that big, horrible window when the sun came through on a Saturday morning. You couldn't see what the hell you were seeing on the water. It was awful. Harrogate at the time was, if you look at it in terms of the quality of what John Charles or Ponds Forge or any of the big pools around the country, you'd think it was substandard. But for us, we made it work, and it was great, and the opportunity to be able to dive was there, and Damien made the most of it. And I think that he was just so passionate about getting those fundamental steps right. It really laid a good foundation for me in the future. I think that if I look at key fundamentals, and for me personally, maybe not, but I think that one thing I always look back on in my time in Harrogate was how my parents helped with the adaptation of me being an athlete. I'm extremely fortunate that I had 2 parents who, lived together, worked full-time jobs, but made it possible that me and my brother could actually go and do a sport in the evenings. And I think that the burden that they had, and we all will know this, the burden that they put upon themselves to get me to where I wanted to be was massive. And at the time, I never really thought anything of that. But I think that my mum's motivation and drive to get me to the pool, even when I didn't want to be, we had to do early morning before school training, and no kid wants to get out of bed at 5 o'clock in the morning to go to school, to go to training. But I think that her resilience and her motivation to get me there was ingrained in me from the start. And I think that that's a really positive thing that maybe I don't know if it quite answers your question in terms of those fundamentals, but I think that the fundamentals that I was being taught by others around me really laid me in a good direction for the future.
I think what your point was like very clear in that Damo saw talent and just wanted to, as you said, get it right. He didn't want to make a mistake. He didn't want to, cause something, create a bit of a mishap just by getting too excited and getting carried away, because it's so easy to do when you see talent. You just want to run, and like you can see the future so clearly. You can see the vision, and you just want to do it. But actually, it takes some real strength and control to manage that process and build things correctly. And that, on top of the resilience that you mentioned, is super important, because that's what then takes you above, the people that you're competing against. For example, when you injured your arm and you had to come back from that, and if you weren't a resilient person, you wouldn't be back in the water in 8 weeks, because there'd be an issue with it. There'd be something that would hold you back. But that resilience combined with the love that you have for the sport made you want to get back into it so quickly, which I think is super important. But I want to take you forward to a moment where resilience was extremely key for you, which was London 2012. And I kind of feel like I'm skipping out quite a lot by jumping straight to that moment, but there's a lot there. And the person that you were then compared to how you progressed through your career with all the success that you had after that point, how did you change as a person as you were progressing through that? How did that moment in 2012 affect you as a person through 2016, through 2020, through 2024? Considering the resilience that you had to deal with in that particular moment.
Mm.
Can you clarify also just quickly what actually happened in
Yeah, of course.
for those who don't know?
Yeah,
Probably a
yeah,
good
of course,
idea.
yeah. So London 2012 was my first Olympic Games, and I still remember being a kid and putting the little stickers in my window, the bid for London 2012, and my mum and dad being super excited about how the Olympics could come to the UK, and I never thought truly that I would be there. And I still remember putting those stickers up now. But yeah, basically I competed at 17 years old at London 2012 in front of, I think, 17 to 18,000 fans, which
Ridiculous crowd.
is mad. And I was way out of my depth. Didn't know it at the time. Thought I was Superman. Everything had pretty much gone right for me building up to this point. And I very quickly realized I was out of my depth, and like a rabbit in headlights, completely froze basically. And on my final dive, I had a double out, which is 4 2.5, 2 twists. I did the hurdle step, and my knees completely went. I knee buckled, fell in, did a front somersault, failed the dive in front of all those people, in front of my friends and family, in front of everybody watching at home. Yeah, that basically was one of the worst possible outcomes of that supposed great time in my life. I think that obviously everyone builds up their first Olympic Games. It's going to be this amazing thing, and when it all comes crashing down like that, it's pretty horrendous. So yeah, that was pretty bad. But before that, a couple of years, you flash back a couple of years, you go back 2 years, I won the Junior World Championships on 103 meter, Junior World Champion on 2 boards at one time. I qualified in Singapore the year before to the Olympic Games. I didn't even, this shows how naive I was to how hard London 2012 was. When I qualified, I didn't realize that I'd qualified. I made a final of the World Championships, and nobody thought I was going to do that, but I made the final, and I finished 8th in the end. I was 8th in the world when I was 16. And I didn't even understand that qualified a spot for Team GB for the Olympic Games. I'd never even thought about how you'd even qualify for the Olympics. I'd just taken everything in my stride and enjoyed the ride whilst I was doing it. And it just turned out that it was great. Everything was all falling into place. And then, yeah, I got better and better and started competing in the World Series and made Olympics. And it all went pear-shaped. Yeah, it all went bad. And yeah, it was really hard to come back from it, especially because of I think the embarrassment, probably more than anything, is that, all my friends, all my family were either watching or they were there. And there's so many levels to why it went wrong on the day. I mean, I could talk about it for an age, but there were so many things that I did wrong. But I learned from them very, very quickly. Because it's very hard not to when your entire world comes crashing down like that. One of the best things for the years before that was probably, and how I kind of helped myself through that was meeting Chris. Our first competition together was in 2010, and I'd never really known Chris before that. And we were sharing a room because we were the two youngest on the trip, and we just clicked. We were the best of mates straight away. And I think that even though London went really pear-shaped, it went really well for him. And it was really hard for me to go to the pool the next day and watch him make a semi-final and then a final. It was really difficult. But I think that our friendship and my knowledge that we would hopefully do synchro diving together one day just spurred me on to get back up and not let go. Another great thing about an awful time for me was that just a couple of months later was the Junior World Championships straight after. So I almost had a rerun. I almost had a second go around people who I was at rank 8th in the world at the World Champs before. At the World Cup, I finished 8th as well. So, I should do well at that Junior World Championships. And it was straight after the Olympic Games, and it was at the height of Tom Daley's kind of fame in that way, I guess. It was mad. It was when Twitter and Instagram had first come out, so there was so many fans and stuff at the pools. And I think it just gave me a real reset and a way to not dwell in the failure too much. It almost just move straight on, learn from it, and get back on the horse straight away. I wasn't given the opportunity to sit there and mull it over for too long because I was already training for the next thing. So although it was one of the worst experiences of my life, one, I learned a lot. Two, I had some great people around me that helped me on to the next one. And three, I got to smash it 2 months later and feel like the man again. So yeah, I think that, again, a lot of things just fell into place very nicely for me.
I mean, that is an amazing turnaround, though, because I remember trying to put myself in your shoes in that moment and thinking, oh, like if I obviously remember watching that, and it's true, we'd all watched you progress so quickly the years before, and I was like even like hyping you up to like people I knew like he's 17, but like this is amazing, and like watch Jack, he's like so good, and it's interesting to look back on. But I just wonder, obviously you said you learned a lot and you bounced back within 2 months, which is amazing. But sitting now and reflecting on that time, what do you think is the strongest lesson that specific failure taught you?
The strongest and most pivotal thing that I learned from that was I became obsessed with self-image. And it was at the time when Twitter and Instagram had just started. And I remember every day, this was the early days of social media. And I remember every day waking up to see, another 500 followers have joined, another 1,000 followers. I still remember the day when, because I was sharing a room with Tom Daley in the Olympics, I still remember the day when he'd woken up before me, and when I woke up, he was like, "Oh, check your Twitter page," and I had a blue tick next to my name, and that would have been the best thing in the entire world, and it was all so superficial. Like, these people don't really care about me that much, you know. They might care somewhat, but he was just a number next to a name. And I remember feeling at the time like the coolest person in the entire world. You know, I'm 17, I'm at the Olympics, I've got 50,000 followers, but it all didn't really matter. And I remember being in my competition and checking social media and seeing some of my friends tweet about me diving and like, oh, all my family's watching, you know. And at that point, I thought to myself, what am I doing? And especially looking back now, I think, what the hell was I doing? Why do I care about this person that I barely know and their family having that added pressure of them watching me? I learned from that very quickly to pull myself away from social media whilst competing and really try to eliminate external noise around me that can be controlled and can be squashed, because I think it adds no value to competition, worrying about how you look, how you're perceived, who's watching. I just don't think it adds anything to me. I think some people really, really revel in that, but I think I got hyper fixated on things that to me now and where my values lay just don't mean anything. And that was the biggest thing I think I learned, was controlling external noise.
Well, it's interesting actually, because I remember we caught up very briefly in Singapore this year. So the World Aquatics Championships 2025 were in Singapore. I saw you very briefly. We had a catch up, and I remember you mentioning that it was like difficult for me to message because I think because you'd come off social media for that period of competition. So you've still taken that lesson through and using those habits to this day.
Yeah. Yeah, I still do. I still try my best. You know, I think it's a lot harder now than it used to be, because if you remember, Instagram back in the day was just people posting photos. So like, you're not really missing out on anything. But now social media has evolved to this point where and they're very crafty the way they've done it. It's evolved to be this like part of your life. You know, people get a wide part of the population get their news from social media all the time, you know, rather than news outlets nowadays. And they've got videos and small dopamine hits that are designed to bring you back. So if anything, the addiction has shifted slightly, I guess, and it's far harder to get away from it now, because you feel like you're removing yourself from so much of the world. Whereas back in the day, it was just, you know, people putting out random sentences online, and people posting photos on Instagram. It's obviously evolved a lot more, but nowadays I really do try and stay off it. I think that it's a lot harder to do so than it used to be, but I really do try to keep those morals and keep those lessons that I've learned continuing on with my career. I think they're really important, because again, I can still get wrapped up in what people are saying very, very quickly. I find it very, very easy to be polluted by other people's opinions. I think in that way, I think it's really important that I stay true to myself.
It's such an interesting point as well, because I learned that from you after you got back from London and told the story of you being on Twitter during the event and how that didn't help you way back then. That's when I started, you know, going on airplane mode during competition, because I don't want to see any external noise. I literally got that from you. I remember that so clearly. That's the reason why I do that. And I did that all the way through my competitive career. Even when I was at home training for a competition, I was doing a practice run through, I'd put my phone on airplane mode, because that's what I did in competition, because I didn't want to, you know, have the same experience that you had. That I learned that from you. It was super interesting. But, you know, going from that moment where, you know, you reflect on it very clearly right now, and obviously there's been a lot of time that you can kind of think about it and create a really clear story from it. But in that moment, it must have taken some time to get to that clarity. And I remember thinking, because of the way that we were, it's like when you got back, it's like, how soon can I make a joke about this double out? Like, how soon can I turn it into a joke? Like, how soon is too soon, you know? And that kind of continued all the way through to Rio. And I remember being in Rio, it was like, can we can we talk about that? Because like double out then became your opening dive. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, don't knee buckle in your first dive. And then I was scared to make a joke out of it in case I knee buckled, because that's then, you know, like tempting
Dangerous.
things like that. Yeah, but you know, that showed the way that we dealt with things was through humor and through laughter. But on a deeper level than that, you know, you went into Rio with a great opportunity, individually and synchro. What was your mindset like? How did you as a person at that time, because of London, allow you to do what you then did in Rio? Because it's a remarkable turnaround from one to the next.
Yeah. I think that my biggest downfall in London was probably, and it's something I really struggle with now, is almost thinking about the end result before I've even stepped foot on the board. You know, going into the World Cup, the final qualifier for the Olympic Games in London in 2012, I was in third place until the last round. And I did a front 4.5 because I thought, you know, why not? It's a brand new dive. I'll put it in and see how it goes. I rolled it on my back and got threes and finished eighth, I think, in the end. But I was really happy with everything else. And I got tens for the first time ever in a competition during that competition. And I think that when I got to the Olympics in 2012, thought that maybe this is, you know, maybe I wake up and I'm just, you know, I'm unstoppable. Maybe there's a chance that some people mess up and I end up on the podium, and then I'll get all this, and I'll get the sponsors, and I'll get X, Y, Z. And I've not even done a step of foot on the board yet. You know, they've not announced my name for the first dive, and I've thought about all these things that are all based off of more and more dreaming, basically. You know, just further and further. Whereas in Rio, because I'd had the kick in the teeth of London, I think that it really forced me to never look ahead, because almost in a way, I was scared to look ahead. It's like I am so fearful of what it could be. I'm just going to stay right here where I am. And it almost meant that because I'd failed so remarkably, I was able to stay present so much more. I wasn't able to flash forward, because the year before Rio, 2015, I finished third in the individual. Me and Chris got bronze in the synchro. Again, when we finished third, I hadn't realised that would qualify us for the Olympic Games, but it did, and those things were amazing. So it'd be very easy to take those results and look forward to Rio, and me think, oh, I can get 2 medals here. Genuinely, that never crossed my mind. There was no point where I thought, when I was going to bed the night before competition, I want to go out and get a medal, and then that'll lead to this, and then that'll lead to that, and all. You know, there was no further thought than the competition itself, which was really good. And again, I look on London now as a blessing, as like that was a wake up of how things are not to be done. And AD, you know, someone who's been really pivotal for all three of us, used to say that, you know, you learn nothing from the good days. And London was probably one of the ones where I learned the most about how I should be, how I should compose myself. And I think those lessons from London meant that Rio was just a completely different thing. So when we got to the pool in the synchro, you know, I knew we were looking good. Me and Chris were diving really well in training. I knew that things were good. But obviously things happened. The pool was green, and, you know, it was diving outdoors at night. It was all a bit different. But the way that me and Chris were in what you were talking about before and making a joke about things, we just took it on the chin, and we started making jokes, and we started, you know, laughing about it whilst other people were looking at it and trying to test it for things or whatever. We were just cracking on and having a good time. And I think that just the difference in my psyche between 2012 and Rio was just completely different. I was super fearful of failing a dive. And I had seen on the scoreboard that we were first going into the last round in synchro. And it did cross my mind, don't knee buckle. Obviously, that's like psychology 101. Don't think about not doing something, think about doing something. But it did cross my mind, yeah, that our last dive, and I've always said with Chris, our performance was not our best performance we've done as a synchro pair, but it was just better than everybody else. I think everybody else freaked out somewhat. And me and Chris managed to, our friendship, our humour, and our resilience got us through. to be just on the top of the podium.
And it kind of creates an interesting follow-on because, now we're almost 10 years later after that moment where you became an Olympic champion. And it was an incredible moment for myself watching Freddie as well.
One of the highlights of my career, watching that.
Unbelievable. Just one of the most dramatic days. And then the kind of celebrations afterwards, and it was just phenomenal. But you weren't thinking about what something like that could potentially bring you because you had to stay in the moment.